Salutations, respected viewers. I am George from Ireland. So behind me you see a statue of Abraham Lincoln and Tsar Alexander II. So there they are, shaking hands. In reality, they never met. Remember, American presidents in those days never left the United States during their term of office, and indeed Lincoln never left the United States in his life. Russian Tsars occasionally did for big conferences or to lead their armies beyond their frontiers. So these two were contemporaries. What else unites them? Well, in 1861, the Tsar issued the proclamation whereby he freed the serfs. Remember, almost half the population here were not fully free. They had to labor for their overlords, and they had to live in that village and things like that. They were souls, often referred to as souls. There was a certain minimum rights, but they weren't allowed to just go somewhere else and find a job, so do some unpaid work. Some of them belonged to boyars, as in aristocrats. Some of them were state serfs, and there were also some free peasants as well. So some people had warned the Tsar that they were the powder keg under the state. It could be a revolutionary situation. There had been a number of serf rebellions in the time leading up to this. So that was that. Remember, serfdom was the norm in Europe until this time. Only 1848 was abolished in the Austrian Empire. 1789 abolished in France. Ireland, we never had it. We're very free people. England abolished it in the 1570s, really recognizing that it had largely been abolished already, just fallen into abeyance. So these people were free to sell their labor as they wished to. And then these free peasants, then they were given land, but they had to pay that back to the state over decades, over 50 years, but people fell behind. So by the time the Russian Revolution had came, some of them had already bought it, some of them hadn't quite bought it, and things like that. And so the state compensated many of the aristocrats for the loss of the service of these people. You should see Gogol's, read Gogol's novel, Lost Souls, because Dead Souls, or sometimes it's translated Lost Souls, for buying up the rights to these serfs. He bought dead people. You're supposed to register their death, but a lot of landlords didn't even bother to register their deaths. But there was certain advantage to someone going around buying the certificate saying that you own this person. Certain minimum rights. The serfs had a right to stay together as a family. They couldn't be split up, and to stay in their home village. They couldn't be sent away somewhere else. But it is known that sometimes when people were gambling, they would even use serfs as whatever their bargaining chips. If I don't have money to pay you my gambling rights, you can have serfs. Although the thing is that you have to go with the land. They're attached to the land, even though they don't want to stay in that village. So obviously, Honest Abe from Kentucky, well, he moved around a bit, but he's best known as being an Illinois lawyer and being elected for Illinois, or later elected president, obviously, in November 1860, and being inaugurated on the 4th of March, 1861. A Republican. It was just after the birth of the Republican Party. So, in a sense, he was from the South. I mean, Kentucky was a slave state. Born in a log cabin, you can rise to the presidency. Well, there have been no similar rags to riches stories for presidents in recent decades. But nevertheless, it was an astonishing achievement. It was something that was unimaginable in a European country at that time. And his father had been a slaveholder. His father-in-law had been a slaveholder. His father had been from Virginia, and so on. Abe Lincoln, he once went to New Orleans where he saw a man sold at auction, and this had a profound impression on him. It made him recoil with revulsion from the diabolical nature of slavery. But he said that he would not interfere with slavery where it existed. It was a state issue, not a federal issue. It was for up to each state to abolish it for itself, and so that was that. Preserving the Union was his goal. And but even before he became president, South Carolina had already seceded from the Union. They were leaving the Union, and 10 more states followed them. Said we're setting up the Confederate States of America. South Carolina first of all becoming independent, and then uniting with some of the other states, which also broke away from the United States, forming the Confederate States of America, the CSA. Virginia initially voted against secession, then they held another vote, then they narrowly voted to leave. So 11 states in all seceded. You may know the flag of the CSA, and it's got 13 stars in it. There are only actually 11 that seceded, but I suppose they were claiming possibly Kentucky or Missouri, which had a large minority who sympathized with the Confederacy. So Lincoln said, if I could preserve the Union without freeing a single slave, I would do that. If I could preserve the Union by freeing all the slaves, I would do that. If I could preserve the Union by freeing some slaves but not others, I would also do that, because the top priority for him was keeping the United States together. Anyway, and he was aware there were a few people in the North who were pro-slavery. Even those who were abolitionists often said, well, let's let the states do this, and have the federal government do it. And so he didn't want to start the Civil War, only fight if absolutely necessary. And then he said, I'm going to collect taxes and imposts from the South, and I'm going to resupply the Union Army and the US Navy bases in the South. So there was Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. South Carolina was the most fire-eating state, as in the most pugnacious one, the most ardently pro-slavery. Not the African Americans, obviously, but the white supremacists. Not suggesting that all white Southerners were like that, but sorry to say, got to be frank, it was a majority. And so they bombarded Fort Sumter when he was attempting to resupply it, and Lincoln thought, well, this is good because they have started the war, not me. I took no aggressive action, and now I have the North largely united behind me. Okay, there was nothing else we could have done. They didn't offer us an ultimatum, and the war was forced upon us, so therefore we have to fight in self-defense. If he had taken any precipitate action, people might say, you were aggressive, the war could have been avoided, it's your fault. But no, Jefferson Davis was elected president of the CSA, and he was canny enough also not to want to be seen to be the one who provoked a conflict. To avoid conflict, if possible, the CSA might lose. Even if they won, the cost might be incredibly high. But some young hotheads in South Carolina had gone ahead. Anyway, so obviously the war dragged on and became incredibly bloody. The Butcher's Bill was over 600,000 by the end. So keeping the Union together was not enough of a moral principle. One of the reasons he didn't say this is a federal issue, we're outlawing slavery throughout the United States, is the border states, Kentucky and Maryland and so on, they might have bolted to the other side during the Confederacy if he'd done that. But they chose to abolish slavery for themselves during the war. Remember West Virginia? Well, quite a few counties in Virginia got together and said, can we break away and rejoin the United States? And the US government said, yes, of course, we'll come back. We'll recognize you. And that's how the state West Virginia was created in the Appalachian Mountains, this mountainous area where there were very few plantations and almost no African Americans were held in servitude. So it was highly hypocritical of Washington, D.C. to do that, because there you're saying that a smaller unit is not allowed to break away from a polity. That's your principle for fighting against the Confederacy, but there you are allowing a smaller unit to break away from a polity, as in many counties in the western part of Virginia to break away from the state of Virginia. Moreover, the Confederates, of course, could say, wait a second, the United States is founded on the very principle of the right of secession. These 13 colonies were entitled to secede from the British Empire, and so too, we southern states are allowed to secede from the United States. There we are. So Lincoln congratulated the Tsar on abolishing serfdom, and the Tsar congratulated him on the Emancipation Proclamation. Remember, first of all, that was only saying those southern states which have not yet been recaptured, that are still in a state of rebellion, these people, these African Americans there who held in thraldom, are now at liberty, but they often had the Union Army to protect them lest they be slaughtered by the Confederate Army. And so those border states, slavery was allowed there until they chose to abolish it for themselves, and the areas of the Confederacy which had been recaptured by the US Army, slavery was still allowed there for a little bit. And finally, obviously, there was an amendment to the Constitution, and slavery was abolished. So that was that. And he was re-elected president, and then just after the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, President Lincoln said, well, let's go to Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. and take in a show. There was this British theatrical company there to perform a farce entitled Our American Cousins. And halfway through the show, you may know that there was a gunshot, and people fell over laughing, thought, wow, what a jolly jape, someone's pretending to assassinate the president. I mean, that's never happened before. And that's when John Wilkes Booth jumped several feet onto the stage and uttered the immortal words, Sic semper ad tyrannis, thus always to tyrants. It's part of the motto of Virginia. And anyway, he was later tracked down and killed in a shootout. But that was the end of Lincoln. Now he belongs to the ages, as it was said at the time. So there was a striking parallel between the abolition of serfdom here and the abolition of chattel slavery in the United States only 2 years later. In 1863. Obviously, the abolition of slavery initially was only for the areas the US government had not yet brought back into control. and then just after that was the Constitutional Amendment, which outlawed it. So Alexander II, he too was assassinated when there were various revolutionary groups said we must have a genuine reform here, some sort of parliamentary government, maybe not full democracy. Of course, most people couldn't read at that time, not just in Russia, in most countries. And he'd allowed some sort of local assemblies for the aristocracy. No longer were rural areas to be ruled by land captains. And then then a bomb was thrown by Volya Narodnaya, People's Will, this revolutionary group, which fatally wounded him in St. Petersburg. There's a cathedral where his blood was spilt. So that was that. It was obviously not a good move by the radicals, because he was succeeded by his reactionary son, Alexander II. So that's some connections in Russian and American history.